For decades, Russian tanks were regarded as a symbol of military power and industrial strength. From the T-34 tanks that played a decisive role in the Second World War to the Su-152 self-propelled guns, and later the T-72 main battle tanks, armored vehicles formed the backbone of Moscow's military doctrine throughout the Cold War. This legacy shaped a global perception of Russian armored forces as formidable and nearly invincible. That perception remained central when President Vladimir Putin launched the full-scale invasion of Ukraine, relying on one of the largest tank fleets in the world, including modernized platforms such as the T-90M alongside Soviet-era systems. At the outset of the invasion, expectations in Moscow were that Ukrainian defenses would collapse quickly under the pressure of armored advances. However, developments on the battlefield in Ukraine challenged that assumption. The conflict has exposed vulnerabilities in Russian armored tactics, intelligence assessments, and logistics, while Ukraine has implemented asymmetric defenses that combine drones, tactical intelligence, and Western-supplied armored vehicles. The result has been significant visible losses of Russian tanks across multiple sectors of the front. One of the most widely circulated battlefield incidents occurred near Donetsk. Video footage showed a U.S.-supplied M2A2 Bradley infantry fighting vehicle engaging and disabling a Russian T-90 tank, considered among the most advanced in Russia's arsenal. The sequence captured successive, precise strikes that ultimately destroyed the tank. Analysts have described the incident as a clear example of asymmetric warfare, demonstrating how an infantry fighting vehicle, when combined with effective tactics and targeting, can neutralize a heavier main battle tank. Additional footage from the front has documented Russian tanks, including T-72 variants, being targeted by Ukrainian first-person view drones. In one instance, a tank struggling to maneuver in deep snow was struck repeatedly by an FPV drone before exploding. According to the text, such incidents form part of a broader pattern of losses attributed to Ukrainian mechanized units, including the 93rd Mechanized Brigade. These engagements highlight the growing role of unmanned aerial systems in degrading traditional armored capabilities. The battlefield impact has not been limited to drones alone. In February 2026 near Pokrovsk, Ukrainian forces operating Leopard 2A4 tanks from the 155th Mechanized Brigade reportedly engaged Russian positions concealed among buildings and tree lines. After firing multiple rounds and executing rapid withdrawal maneuvers, Ukrainian crews destroyed all identified targets in the area. The Leopard 2A4, described as a product of German engineering, demonstrated coordinated firepower and mobility under combat conditions. Such operations illustrate Ukraine's combined use of Western armored platforms, drones, and tactical intelligence to counter Russia's larger inventory. In response to mounting losses, Russia's defense industry introduced countermeasures aimed at neutralizing the growing drone threat. Among them were portable electronic jamming systems mounted on tanks, designed to create an electronic shield to disrupt incoming FPV drones. These systems, reportedly installed on platforms such as the T-90M, were intended to sever communication between drone operators and their aircraft. However, Ukrainian forces adapted with frequency-hopping software and autonomous AI-assisted dive capabilities, allowing drones to complete attack trajectories even if signal links were interrupted. As described in the source text, the visible antenna arrays intended for protection sometimes made tanks more conspicuous on the battlefield. Russia also introduced thermal camouflage covers known as Nikitka, intended to reduce engine heat signatures and evade detection by thermal imaging systems. While conceptually designed to obscure thermal and radar signatures, these covers were reportedly unable to conceal friction heat from moving tracks or muzzle flashes from firing. As technological countermeasures struggled to deliver results, some Russian units added additional layers of explosive reactive armor, including Contact 1 and Contact 5 bricks, in an effort to reinforce vulnerable areas. However, increased weight affected maneuverability and suspension performance, potentially making tanks more vulnerable to precision drone strikes and modern anti-tank weapons equipped with tandem warheads. The cumulative effect of these battlefield developments has raised broader questions about the survivability of traditional armored forces in a conflict defined by drones, precision munitions, and sustained attrition. The war in Ukraine has increasingly been characterized not as rapid maneuver warfare, but as a prolonged contest of endurance, technology, and industrial capacity. The scale of Russian armored losses has become a central issue in assessments of the war. Particular attention has focused on the fate of the T-80 tank, once considered one of the Soviet Union's most advanced platforms. Originally developed during the Cold War in response to the American M1 Abrams, the T80 was designed for high-speed maneuver warfare against NATO forces. Equipped with a gas turbine engine, it offered significant mobility and firepower for its time. However, according to years of satellite image analysis cited in the source text, the number of available T-80 tanks has declined sharply during the course of the war in Ukraine. At the beginning of the conflict, there were approximately 1,679 T-80 tanks in active service and reserve. After 4 years of sustained combat and attrition, only 134 vehicles reportedly remain in reserve. Storage facilities that once held hundreds of tanks lined up for refurbishment are now described as largely empty. One example cited is the 22nd storage base, which previously housed around 600 tanks and now reportedly contains roughly 80 non-operational vehicles. The data suggests that Russia has not produced new T-80 tanks from scratch since the early 2000s. The T-80 BVM models currently observed on the battlefield are refurbished and modernized versions of older hulls, and those existing hulls are now nearing exhaustion. Satellite imagery further indicates that refurbishment facilities are increasingly producing armored recovery vehicles based on T-80 chassis rather than fully combat-ready tanks. This shift reflects both the degradation of available equipment and the difficulty of reconstituting armored strength under wartime conditions. Establishing a new production line would require significant industrial investment, infrastructure expansion, and time, all while Russia faces ongoing sanctions and supply constraints. Beyond the T-80, the broader statistics on Russian armored losses are substantial. According to the International Institute for Strategic Studies, Russia entered the war with approximately 3,000 main battle tanks in active service. Verified losses documented through visual evidence by the independent open-source project Oryx have exceeded 4,000 tanks. When infantry fighting vehicles and other heavy armored platforms are included, data cited from RBC Ukraine place total armored vehicle losses at around 20,000 units. These figures illustrate the intensity of the attritional nature of the conflict. Production capacity has not matched the rate of loss. According to the figures presented in the source text, Russia is able to produce approximately 300 new tanks per year, while potentially refurbishing up to 1,500 older vehicles annually from storage. However, battlefield losses are reported to exceed 1,000 tanks per year. This imbalance suggests a steady depletion of available reserves. If current trends continue, the extensive Soviet-era stockpiles that once underpinned Russia's armored strength could be exhausted by the end of 2026, leaving production capacity as the primary determinant of available forces. The human cost of the war is also reflected in competing official statements. Sergei Rutskoy has stated that Ukrainian losses since the beginning of the Russian military operation have exceeded 1.5 million personnel, including 52,000 in 2025 alone. In contrast, figures published by the Ukrainian General Staff as of February 24, 2026, indicate that total Russian personnel losses since the start of the war have reached more than 1.2 million, including those killed, wounded, missing, and captured. The Ukrainian data also report 920 additional Russian soldiers added to casualty figures in the previous 24 hours, despite ongoing winter conditions. Independent analysis cited in the text reinforces the magnitude of Russian losses. A report completed in January 2026 by the Center for Strategic and International Studies in Washington concluded that total Russian military losses had surpassed 1.2 million personnel. While casualty figures from both sides remain subject to verification challenges and information warfare dynamics, multiple sources point to sustained, large-scale attrition. The economic implications of armored losses are significant. The average cost of a T72 tank is estimated at approximately $2 million, while a T90 is estimated at $4.5 million. Using an average value of $2.5 million per tank and applying it to more than 4,000 lost tanks results in an estimated financial impact of roughly $11 billion in tank losses alone. When infantry fighting vehicles and other armored vehicles are included, the total estimated cost rises to between $20 and $30 billion. Russia's defense budget for 2025 reached approximately $100 billion, equivalent to 7.5% of gross domestic product. Tank and armored vehicle losses alone account for more than 10% of that annual defense budget. The economy is described as operating in a war-focused mode, with civilian sectors contracting, innovation slowing, and industrial capacity redirected toward continuous weapons production. At the same time, oil revenues have reportedly declined significantly under the impact of sanctions, placing additional strain on state reserves. Industrial output faces structural constraints. Even at maximum estimated capacity, Russia can produce around 300 new tanks annually, supplemented by refurbished older models. However, the attrition rate on the battlefield exceeds production. This dynamic underscores the transformation of the conflict into a war of endurance, in which industrial resilience, financial sustainability, and technological adaptation determine long-term outcomes. As losses accumulate, the question of how long existing stockpiles can sustain operational requirements remains central to strategic assessments. While Russian armored forces face sustained attrition, attention has also turned to the performance of Western-supplied tanks in Ukrainian service. The arrival of 31 M1A1 Abrams tanks provided by the United States marked a significant development. However, their initial deployment in 2024 was accompanied by operational challenges. Russian forces reportedly prioritized these tanks as high-value targets, leading to losses that compelled Ukraine to temporarily withdraw them from frontline operations. The logistical complexity of the Abrams platform, including its large size, intensive maintenance requirements, and reliance on specific fuel types, created additional constraints. Pentagon spokesperson, Brigadier General Pat Ryder, publicly acknowledged these difficulties, stating that the Abrams is a complex weapon system that is challenging to maintain. The logistical burden included servicing turbine engines and ensuring consistent fuel supply under battlefield conditions. Despite these obstacles, Ukrainian forces adapted their use of the platform to local conditions. The situation evolved further with the delivery of 49 additional Abrams variants equipped with diesel engines from Australia, reducing some logistical pressures associated with fuel requirements. Ukrainian technicians implemented field modifications to improve survivability against drones and anti-tank missiles such as the Kornet. These adaptations included the installation of Soviet-era contact reactive armor and the addition of protective steel cage structures designed to disrupt drone strikes. The modified vehicles were informally referred to as Frankenstein configurations due to their hybrid protective systems. During battles near Pokrovsk, these adapted Abrams tanks reportedly sustained repeated first-person view drone attacks while maintaining crew survivability and operational capability. The United Kingdom's Challenger 2 tanks, deployed by Ukraine's 82nd Air Assault Brigade, have also been used in frontline operations. Weighing approximately 71 tons and powered by a 1,200 horsepower engine, the Challenger 2 has faced mobility challenges in soft terrain conditions. Nevertheless, its 120mm rifled gun and advanced fire control system, capable of calculating wind and humidity variables, have enabled long-range precision engagements. In operations in the Kursk region, a Challenger 2 crew reportedly destroyed a Russian armored vehicle with a single shot at a distance of 5,300 meters. Ukrainian forces have employed the Challenger 2 in a manner described as analogous to a mobile precision platform rather than a conventional breakthrough tank. Using cover, firing from distance, and withdrawing rapidly, crews have sought to minimize exposure to drone surveillance and anti-tank threats. The tank's Dorchester composite armor has been cited as providing enhanced crew protection. According to the source text, even when struck by missiles launched from Russian helicopters, Challenger 2 crews survived impacts that caused significant damage, allowing the vehicle to continue its mission. The broader transformation of armored warfare in Ukraine reflects a shift from traditional large-scale armored maneuvers to a conflict defined by drones, precision strikes, and sustained attrition. Russian forces have expended substantial portions of their Soviet-era armored reserves, facing both technological challenges and industrial constraints. At the same time, Ukraine has integrated Western-supplied armored vehicles with domestic drone capabilities and tactical intelligence networks to offset numerical disadvantages. The economic dimension remains critical, with defense spending reaching $100 billion in 2025, representing 7.5% of Russia's gross domestic product. The financial strain of replacing destroyed equipment compounds existing pressures from sanctions and declining oil revenues. tank losses estimated at more than 4,000 units and armored vehicle losses approaching 20,000 represent tens of billions of dollars in material costs. Production capacity, even when supplemented by refurbishment programs, remains below the annual rate of battlefield losses. As reserves diminish, the war increasingly centers on industrial sustainability and technological adaptation rather than rapid territorial advances. The conflict has exposed vulnerabilities in legacy armored doctrines while highlighting the effectiveness of drones, electronic warfare, and precision munitions. Analysts describe the current phase as a war of endurance in which economic resilience, production capacity, and innovation will determine the long-term balance. The developments on both sides suggest that the era of unchallenged dominance by heavy armored formations has been fundamentally altered. In Ukraine, drones, advanced Western tanks, and adaptive battlefield engineering have reshaped the operational environment. The long-term implications extend beyond the immediate conflict, raising questions about the future role of main battle tanks in modern warfare and the sustainability of large-scale armored arsenals under conditions of continuous technological evolution. For continued coverage and in-depth analysis of the war in Ukraine and its military and economic impact, subscribe to our channel and follow our updates.